Australia's beetle fix turned into a poison wave before officials understood what they had put into the field. In 1935, sugar industry scientists in Queensland opened crates of imported cane toads with one plain hope. The toads would eat the beetles, destroying sugarcane roots. Years later, the central proof was no longer a field chewed by beetles. It was a spread map, with dots pushing across northern Australia. The official fix failed to control the pest and created a new ecological threat. The record begins in the cane fields, where crop damage looked urgent enough to justify a living weapon. Near Gordonvale in North Queensland, the cane fields looked orderly from a distance. Long green rows cut through heavy air. Warm rain left the soil wet. At night, lamps caught the shine on the leaves and the movement of insects along the stalks. Under that surface, the real problem was harder to see.
Cane beetle grubs fed around the roots, cutting into the part of the plant that held the crop upright. Above ground, adult beetles fed on the cane itself. A farmer walking a field in daylight could see the damage in gaps, weak stalks, and plants that never rose the way they should. The beetles were small compared with the industry they threatened. That was what made them dangerous. They did not have to flatten a field in one night. They only had to keep feeding, season after season, until the loss appeared at harvest. Sugar meant labor, land, mills, rail lines, and family income. When the roots failed, the damage moved beyond the row. That pressure matters. In the 1930s, farmers and industry officials wanted a practical answer. Chemical control had limits. Hand labor had limits. The cane fields were wide, humid, and full of hiding places. A pest that fed in the soil and climbed into the crop could not be removed one beetle at a time. Then came the animal that seemed made for the job.
The cane toad was large, tough, and hungry. It had already been used in sugar regions outside Australia, including Hawaii. It could sit under a lamp and snap at moving insects. It could survive heat, wet ground, and rough handling. Inside a crate, it looked like a tool that breathed. The image is easy to see. Wooden boxes, damp cloth, heavy-bodied toads pressed together in the dark, fieldmen moving them toward cane country, scientists watching the first releases as if the crop had just been given its own night guard. On wet field edges, the toads looked persuasive. Their bodies were low and solid. Their mouths were wide. Under lamps, they waited for insects to move through the light. That image helped sell the plan. But the field was not a laboratory tray. The beetle was not waiting in one convenient place. Crop damage made the plan sound practical, but the beetle's life cycle carried the first warning. The accepted explanation fit into one sentence. Bring in cane toads, let them eat cane beetles, and protect the sugar crop. On its face, that sentence was not foolish. Biological control had an appeal that brute force did not. Instead of chasing every insect with labor or chemicals, the industry could place a predator in the field and let nature do the work. One organism would suppress another. The farm would gain a living control system. That was the promise. In Queensland, after importation and breeding, releases began in 1935. The decision came from a real agricultural problem, not idle curiosity. Cane growers wanted relief. Scientists wanted a method that could function in the field. The sugar industry wanted a fix that kept working after the crates were empty. The flaw was the assumption buried inside the plan. For the toad to control the beetle, it had to meet the beetle where the beetle lived and fed. That sounds small. It was the whole case. Many of the target beetles were not waiting on bare ground. Some were in the soil as grubs, feeding around the roots. Others were higher on cane stalks as adults, beyond the easy reach of a heavy amphibian built for ground-level hunting. The toad could eat many things. That did not mean it could reach the exact pest at the exact stage that mattered most. Picture a cane row at night. The toad sits below, in the mud and grass. The beetle is above, feeding in the cane. Between them are height, plant structure, and timing. A wide mouth cannot solve that gap if the animal carrying it cannot climb into the right place. The measurement matters because success depended on reach. The toad's body told part of the story. It was strong, but it was not built to patrol upper cane like a bird or insect hunter. It waited, lunged, and swallowed what came near the ground. That made it effective at catching many small animals. It did not guarantee contact with cane beetles where growers needed protection. The official explanation was under pressure before the spread began. Not because the toads were weak, because they were capable in the wrong way. That is the part that changes the case. The same traits that made the cane toad attractive as a farm tool made it dangerous outside the farm target. It was not a narrow instrument. It was a generalist animal with appetite, endurance, and chemical defense. Once released, it did not ask which insect mattered economically. It ate what it could catch. A policy memo can define a target. A living animal cannot. To reconstruct what happened, the record has to follow the release pathway. Imported toads arrived, breeding facilities multiplied them, and field releases placed them in cane country. Each step looked controlled. Each step also increased the number of animals that could move, breed, and survive without human instruction. In a breeding tank, the plan looked manageable. Adult toads could be held, counted, moved, and released. Eggs could be watched in water. Young toads could be raised in quantity. The process looked like a program. But the animal inside that program had its own mechanism. Cane toads lay eggs in long strings in warm water. Those strings can stretch through shallow ponds, ditches, and still pools. Tadpoles gather and grow where heat and water allow it. When conditions fit, the population does not stay tied to the release crate. It becomes a reproductive front. The proof objects are plain: tanks with dark water, egg strings looping below the surface, field notebooks recording releases, toads beneath lamps, early sightings outside the original areas. Then, in the body of the animal itself, the warning no crate label could neutralize: poison glands behind the head. Those glands mattered because they changed every encounter. The cane toad carried chemical defense in its skin and parotid glands. When threatened or bitten, it could expose predators to toxins.
In plain terms, the toad was not only hard to kill, it could punish the animal that tried. That made it different from a tool a farmer could put away. It was a pest control proposal wrapped around an animal with appetite, fast breeding, tolerance for harsh conditions, and poison. The field investigation, filmed from above, would not look dramatic at first. A few release sites, cane rows, wet ditches, small movements at night. One notebook entry here, another sighting there. Then the dots start to matter. Biological control works on paper when the introduced organism stays focused on the problem and the ecosystem absorbs it without major damage. That is the clean version. In the field, the cane toad was not confined to cane beetles, one field edge, or the original hope. The early spread observations were the first sign that the living weapon had crossed from experiment into landscape. Toads appeared away from release points.
They used water, roadsides, disturbed land, and wet season conditions. They did not need permission from the sugar industry to move. The plan had a reason to work on paper. The first result did not match the promise. The first major proof object is the map. Not a single dramatic photograph. Not one dead beetle in a jar. A spread map, built from sightings and records, showing cane toads moving from Queensland outward across northern Australia. The dots do what the original plan could not. They connect the cane fields to wetlands, towns, roadsides, river systems, and country far beyond the narrow problem of sugarcane beetles. That map is the uncomfortable number, even without a single population count. It shows range. The toads did not meaningfully solve the cane beetle problem in the way the release had promised. Yet their range expanded beyond the places where that promise had been made. The animal introduced for one crop zone became a moving front. Hold that detail. Failure alone would have been serious. If the toads had stayed in the fields and simply failed to control beetles, the record would be about a bad agricultural bet. Costly, embarrassing, contained. The map shows something worse. It shows a control measure that kept working as an organism after the control idea failed. Wet nights helped. Warm water helped. Roads helped. Human settlement helped. The toad did not need untouched wilderness to move. It used disturbed edges, drains, yards, ponds, tracks, and seasonal water. Each new sighting could look minor by itself. On the map, those sightings became a direction, a front. Imagine the camera above northern Australia. The first dots cluster in Queensland cane country. Then they loosen. They push west and south through suitable corridors. They appear near water, near towns, near roads, near river systems. The crop zone is no longer the frame. The continent is. The map matters because it turns a local release into a national record. It shows the difference between placing an animal and controlling an animal. The first happened in 1935. The second never really happened. The old explanation needed the toad to be a crop protector. The evidence showed it becoming a landscape occupant. That distinction is not academic. A crop protector is judged by beetle reduction. A landscape occupant is judged by everything it touches. Once the toad left the narrow promise, the questions changed. What does it eat? Where does it breed? Which animals try to eat it? What happens when they do? The first map did not answer all of that. It opened the larger file. In the cane fields, the toad had been judged by whether it could reach the beetle. Across northern Australia, it had to be judged by whether native animals could survive reaching it. The map showed movement. The worst evidence came from the bite. Australian predators had evolved with their own prey, their own risks, and their own learned rules.
The cane toad entered that system carrying chemical defenses many of those predators were not prepared to handle. A quoll sees a toad near water. A goanna finds one moving through grass. A snake strikes. A freshwater crocodile bites. For 1 second, each encounter can look like ordinary predation. Then the toxin changes the outcome. Bufotoxin is the word often attached to the toad's chemical defense. Plainly, it is poison secreted from glands that can make biting the toad dangerous or fatal. The predator does not get several lessons if the first lesson stops the heart or disables the body before avoidance can be learned. The proof objects become grim, but they need to be handled carefully. A dead predator near a waterhole. Night vision footage of a native animal approaching a toad. A wildlife officer lifting a carcass into a bag. A stomach content study showing what the animal tried to eat. A community warning sign telling people what has arrived. No gore is needed.
The record is clear without it. The catch was built into the solution. The cane toad was introduced because it could survive and eat. Its poison made it harder for local predators to remove. In an ecosystem where many animals did not have a long history with that toxin, the toad's defense became a weapon against the food web that might have contained it. Then, the clean explanation fails. The toad was no longer only a failed beetle control agent. It was a test of predator behavior, evolutionary history, and ecological timing. Some animals could learn. Some populations could adapt over time. Some individuals never got the chance. Quolls became one of the warning symbols because they are predators with speed and curiosity. A toad-sized moving animal can look like food. For a predator used to seizing small prey, hesitation is not always natural. That first bite can be the fatal mistake. Goannas faced a similar pressure. These large lizards investigate, hunt, and scavenge across broad country. When cane toads arrived, the usual rules around edible animals changed. A mouthful of the wrong amphibian could remove a predator that had survived drought, heat, and other hazards. Freshwater crocodiles added another layer. They are not delicate animals, and that is exactly why their vulnerability mattered. If a tough predator can be hit by a poison it did not evolve to handle, the problem is not weakness. The problem is mismatch. Snakes face their own version of the trap. A snake strike is fast. The mouth closes before the animal can conduct a chemical review. The cane toad's toxin turns that speed against the predator. The field evidence did not require one grand collapse everywhere at once. It came through local reports, carcass collections, behavior studies, and changes observed after the toad front arrived. The pattern was enough to force a different question. What happens when a biological control agent becomes prey that fights back chemically? The answer depends on species, place, and time. That uncertainty matters. The release cannot explain every dead predator, every local decline, or every change in northern Australia. Ecosystems have droughts, floods, fires, land clearing, roads, disease, and other pressures. But the cane toad added a new rule. Some native predators now had to identify a dangerous animal before instinct told them to bite. That is not a small change. It is a food web rewritten at mouth level. Once the poison entered the food web, the cane toad became an ecological pressure test. The deeper proof chain runs across maps, roads, research stations, and community nights where people went out with lights and buckets. The spread maps kept changing. The toad front did not remain a historical dot in Queensland. It pushed through northern Australia in phases, often helped by wet seasons and the basic geography of water. Rain filled places where eggs could survive. River systems and floodplains created corridors. Roads and settled edges created disturbed habitat where toads could move and feed. A map of that movement is more than a line across land. It is a record of opportunity. Every wet season could help a new pulse. Every roadside drain could act like a small station. Every town pond or water tank could become part of the route. The toad did not need to conquer all habitat equally. It only needed enough connected places to keep the front alive. Citizen reporting became part of the evidence because the animal was visible. People saw toads on roads after rain. They found them under lights. They saw them near yards, creeks, and culverts. A national warning is easier to track when ordinary residents keep finding the same proof object at their feet. Then came the attempts to limit the damage. Hand collection has been one public response. Community toad busts sent people into parks, yards, and wetlands with gloves, lights, and containers. Traps were tested and used in some places. Research programs examined breeding, movement, toxins, and predator responses. The goal was no longer the original dream of beetle control. It was containment, impact reduction, and learning how a released animal behaves after the release is history. The limits became clear. Once a species is established across a huge range, eradication is not the same task as collection. Removing toads from one pond does not remove eggs from another. Clearing one road corridor does not stop the next wet season movement. A bucket can matter locally. It cannot erase a continental front by itself. That is where the moral complexity enters. Some predators show signs of learning or adaptation. Taste aversion training has been studied as a way to teach animals not to attack cane toads, sometimes by exposing them to a smaller or less lethal version of the threat, so the bad taste teaches avoidance without killing them. In plain terms, researchers try to create caution before the full danger arrives. That approach says something important. The problem is not only the toad's presence, it is the timing of knowledge. If a predator learns early enough, it may survive. If it learns through a lethal bite, there is no second lesson. Local adaptation also complicates the record. In some places, predator populations may recover or shift behavior. Some animals may become more cautious. Some snakes may face selection for traits that reduce lethal exposure. Some individuals avoid toads after a bad encounter. These details keep the story from becoming a flat collapse narrative. Controlled uncertainty matters here. The cane toad did not turn every ecosystem into the same result.
It did not erase every predator. It did not explain every wildlife problem. But the evidence shows a powerful ecological pressure moving through landscapes that did not invite it. Predator declines in some areas, community control efforts, road sightings, wet season expansion, research into training, and continued mapping all point to the same conclusion. The release changed the rules. The old farm question was narrow. Can a toad reduce beetles? The new question is wider. What happens when a living control agent survives better than the plan built around it? That question is still active because the toads are still active. A field report today does not have to treat 1935 as a museum piece. It can point to a road after rain, a community collection night, a research enclosure, or a fresh sighting on a map. The record does not stop with failure. It keeps moving through consequence.
The data cannot prove every local loss came from one animal, but it can prove the release changed the rules of the ecosystem. The largest implication is not that Queensland made one bad agricultural decision long ago. The larger implication is that a living fix can outgrow the human definition of the problem. The cane toad case is no longer only about beetles. It is no longer only about sugar. It has become a cautionary record for every biological control plan that asks one species to solve another. That warning is not anti-science. It is evidence discipline. Biological control can work in some contexts. It can also fail when the introduced organism is too broad in appetite, too successful at breeding, too hard to contain, or too dangerous to animals that were never part of the target. The cane toad forced that distinction into public memory because the proof was visible. The crate was visible. The poison glands were visible. The map was visible. The spread map returns as the central object because it shows what a policy cannot call back. A machine can be shut off. A memo can be replaced. A chemical can be restricted. A living animal that breeds, moves, eats, and defends itself enters a different category. Once it has water, food, shelter, and reproductive success, it is no longer waiting for permission. That is the national warning inside the cane toad story. The original purpose was narrow. The outcome was not. An animal imported to solve a beetle problem became a permanent test of how much control people really have after release. The record has to be fair. The 1930s decision-makers did not have modern ecological modeling, modern invasion biology, or decades of aftermath in front of them. They were facing damaged crops and looking at a tool that seemed to have a precedent in sugar regions elsewhere. The pressure was real. But pressure does not make the outcome vanish. The release cannot explain every ecological change in northern Australia. It cannot be blamed for every dead predator, every altered population, or every stressed habitat. Land use, climate, disease, vehicles, and other pressures all matter. Still, the cane toad proves one hard thing. A single intervention can outgrow its original purpose. That brings the record back to the first crate. Inside, it was not only a proposed beetle eater, it was a reproducing animal with poison glands, a wide diet, and the ability to move through wet country. The warning was already there, but it was written in biological traits rather than official language. The sugar industry saw a tool. The ecosystem received a participant. Those are not the same thing. When the first toads were released in 1935, the question seemed practical. Could they reduce cane beetles enough to protect the crop? That was the promise placed into the field. The later record asks a harder question. What happens when the tool fails at the assigned job, but succeeds at being alive? The answer is still on the map. Dot by dot, sighting by sighting, the cane toad moved from a crop defense strategy into a national warning. It carried the proof in its body: appetite, endurance, eggs, and toxin. It carried the contradiction in its history: released for beetles, remembered for aftermath. So where do you land? Was Australia's cane toad release a necessary gamble made under agricultural pressure, a preventable failure built on weak assumptions, or a warning that no ecosystem should be used as a testing ground without an exit plan? And the larger question may be even harder. Can biological control ever be safe at national scale when the tool can reproduce beyond the field, move beyond the target, and poison animals that never belonged to the plan? The record leaves room for careful judgment. Farmers were facing real losses. Scientists were looking for a practical method.
The sugar fields had a problem that demanded an answer. But the spread map shows the cost of confusing a living organism with a controllable instrument. The first crate was small enough to carry. The aftermath was not. That is why the cane toad remains one of the most important warning files in environmental history. It shows how a fix can become a force, how a local pest problem can become a continental lesson, and how the missing question can be more dangerous than the known threat. Leave your verdict in the comments. Necessary gamble, preventable failure, or permanent warning. Then subscribe for the next record, the next field report, the next hidden file, and the next intervention that refuses to stay contained.